And people love talking about the finishes, whether it's an acquisition or a launch or a bankruptcy. Everyone that's where the fanfare is in terms of headlines. And yet everything in the middle, obviously the volatility, the extraordinary volatility in the middle of these projects is really where the gems lie.
Hi, I'm James Taylor, business creativity and innovation keynote speaker, and this is The Creative Life, a show dedicated to you, the creative. If you're looking for motivation, inspiration, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's an author, musician, entrepreneur, performer, designer, or thought leader. They'll share with you their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, and much, much more. You'll find show notes for this episode as well as free training on creativity over at jamestaylor.me. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to welcome onto the show Scott Belsky. Scott Belsky is an entrepreneur, investor, and author of the new book, The Messy Middle, finding your way through the hardest and most crucial part of any bold venture. He is currently Chief Product Officer at Adobe, serves as a board member to several early-stage companies, and is a venture partner at Benchmark, a legendary VC firm based in San Francisco. Scott was previously the founder and CEO of Behance, a leading online platform to showcase and discover creative work. He is also the creator of 99U, Behance's think tank and annual conference devoted to execution in the creative world. In addition to The Messy Middle, Belsky is also the author of Making Ideas Happen and co-author of the 99U book series. It's my great pleasure to have Scott with us today. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So share with everyone what's happening in your world just now.
Oh, not much. Just kidding. No, it's been actually quite a busy period I'm coming off of. This first of all, The Messy Middle is a project that has been going on for maybe 6 or 7 years, with little scribbles of insights and observations in boardrooms or at 1 a.m. conference calls with entrepreneurs going through a big fluctuation in their venture, or talking to writers and artists and friends of mine who have very volatile middles of their own journeys. So I'm excited to finally see this project come to the light of day. And then, of course, I have my day job building products for creative people, advising other entrepreneurs on their journeys. And there's a new baby in the household. So to top it all off, when it rains, it pours. It's exciting.
So the book's really summed up by, there's a phrase that you have there, the middle makes or breaks you. That it's the period after the initial honeymoon of starting a new venture or creative project, but before you get to some sense of exit or completion, which really provides the most opportunity for growth, but also the most opportunity for potential failure, for things to go awry. I'm interested, what made you want to write this book about this particular topic at this stage in your life?
Well, a big part of it was frustration. I was frustrated with how much obsession there is over the starts and finishes of creative projects and bold new ventures. People love it when there's a discussion about the romanticism of the start of something, people leaving their job and starting something, people taking a big risk and starting something, and people love talking about the finishes, whether it's an acquisition or a launch or a bankruptcy. Everyone that's where the fanfare is in terms of headlines, and yet everything in the middle, obviously the volatility, the extraordinary volatility in the middle of these projects is really where the gems lie. And if you sit down with anyone who's embarked and successfully completed a big, massive project, it's actually hard for them to remember the middle. In some ways, the things that we go through in the middle, the mundane, repetitive work, the anonymity, the ambiguity, the uncertainty, the self-doubt that we encounter along the way, these are things that we're not necessarily proud of, and we kind of, in fact, want to forget them as opposed to remember and attribute our success to them. And so I wanted to try to illuminate this middle journey and the volatility, and also I wanted to make a few points. One which is that we are not our best self, whether it's at the valleys, the really low points when we're making decisions out of fear, or at the peaks when we're making decisions out of our ego, or falsely attributing the things that worked to what, or falsely attributing the things that we did to what worked. And so I wanted to kind of illuminate the fact that, gosh, like the peaks and valleys are actually spotlights of seduction to do the wrong thing. And I wanted to talk about that. And then the second thing I wanted to help showcase was that this whole big volatile middle journey can really be broken down into two things: endurance and optimization. enduring those lows, trying to keep yourself engaged, short-circuiting your team's reward system, all the things you need to do to kind of stay engaged despite how difficult and uncertain the times will become, as well as optimize the heck out of everything that works. So whether it's what's working in your team, what's working in your product, how do you actually throw energy at that, which is actually the opposite of what most people do in their journeys. What they'll typically do is if something's working, like, hey, if some way your team is working right now, or the way you manage your notes, or the way you kind of schedule your day, if that's working, you then leave it alone. You focus on putting out fires as opposed to emphasizing or optimizing the things that are working. And so I wanted to also change people's mindset around that, because actually that's not how some of the most extraordinary projects and teams succeed.
One of the chapters, one of the parts I found really interesting in the book, which is about where you talk about playing the long game. And one of those chapters in there is actually you say about playing the long game by breaking things down into chapters. I thought it was a really interesting way of thinking about that messy middle. Can you talk a little bit about that side?
Yeah, I mean, that chapter, I talk about Ben Silbermann, who's the founder and CEO of Pinterest, and an entrepreneur I've worked with since the very beginning of his venture. And I talk about, first of all, how patient Ben is. When I would ask him, even 6 months into Pinterest, what are your objectives for the next 6 to 12 months? And I would always expect, oh, we're going to release this feature and then that feature. We're going to start making money here and blah, 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 blah. Instead, actually, Ben's answer was, I hope to have a better process around building product. He was so he was so long-term oriented that he was trying to actually build a enduring company and a process that he would be proud of, in a world where everyone's focused on feature, ship, every 2 weeks, agile workflows. And at first, frankly, I didn't know what to make of that. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It was unclear to me how that would play out. Now, fast forward, Pinterest has been very successful. It has done things differently than most Silicon Valley companies. And another thing that I learned from Ben, and more recently, as I connected with him and interviewed him for the book, is that he always broke Pinterest as a story for his team down into chapters. And so, for example, when they were a US-only website, and they hadn't really internationalized their product yet, he had a year, it was called the year of going global. And then he punctuated the experience of, or the history of Pinterest with another chapter the following year called the year of monetization. And so he always had like a rallying cry in a very long period of time around a single thing, with the thought that if he were to really get it right, he'd have to summon the energy of the company. And so the point of it, the chapter, is that we are narrators of the journey that we are going through, and for our team, we have to merchandise this narrative to them with the same sort of marketing terms and tendencies that we do to customers. We have to make a theme that people resonate with. And also we have to be able to play that long game. We have to really think about the patience required to have a long enough period of time focused on one thing to really get it right.
Now, you're a real passionate product guy. You're chief product officer just now at Adobe, and you actually talk, kind of extending that, about this idea of building the narrative before your product, which I also was a really interesting way to do, because we think, obviously, marketers, they're always used to thinking about narrative and story and the arc and all those kinds of things, but I haven't heard it spoken about quite as much when it comes to really product design. So can you explain what you mean when you say build the narrative before your product?
Yeah, I think that we typically, especially in the digital product world, there's a sense of like, build a prototype, get in there, build an MVP, a minimum viable version of a product. Yet, what I do find that's important is to have at the onset, almost like a splash page of what you want to communicate to potential customers in the future. It's a forcing function for you to make a lot of important decisions about what's the value proposition in my product? What am I really promising? What is the thing that's going to hook people? What are the visuals of the product experience that I think are going to be most compelling? Because those are going to help me determine what that minimum viable product should be. And also, it's also about getting the right team together to do the product. I talk in that section about Garrett Camp, the co-founder of Uber, who really obsesses over the name and the icon and the brand experience of a product even before he starts building a product. And I remember in the early days of Uber, he was kind of reconciling, is it, as a brand, is it everyone's personal driver, or everyone kind of aspires, but it feels like an expensive product? Or is it taxis on demand, which is a very, accessible and inexpensive, but not aspirational product? And a lot of those decisions early on, before that team was actually fully formed, I think really had a big impact on the product experience that was developed. And so building your narrative before your product is a bit of a way of having a compass for which way to go and what to do first.
As I was kind of going through the book, I thought it's almost like the perfect accompaniment for another book which tackles this, I guess the messy middle. It wouldn't really necessarily call it that, but it tackles really what it requires to build a scale, a great creative company. And that book is Creativity Inc. Ed Catmull from Pixar's book. And I think Ed Catmull's book is great because it gives quite a high level. It's very quite autobiographical and telling that story of Pixar. The thing I like about your book, which is, and maybe this is just it's just the way that you write and it's the way that you like to get ideas across, is all the chapters are super short, like 2-3 pages. It's like really, it's the kind of thing you just pick up and you just reflect on. So was that a very kind of conscious decision in terms of you thinking this is how I think people want to read now, this is how they want to consume this information? Or was that just something that's just the way that you like to write and get across information?
Yeah, well, in some ways I wanted to write the book that I would want. And the process of me putting this together was me finding those little pearls of wisdom from others and from experiences that I had or was able to witness that were like those piercing insights. Like one of them, for example, that you may remember from the book is resourcefulness is greater than resources. And I talk about how resourcefulness is like muscle, it never leaves you, whereas resources is like carbs, you just kind of burn through them. That insight came from various startups that I was involved with that raised too much money and as a result lost the feeling of granularity in their business. The money that they raised obfuscated the reality that they needed to face. And, there's so much to that concept of resourcefulness is greater than resources. And so imagine, I had hundreds of these that I found were like piercing and true and embodied something that I experienced or observed that I thought would be a helpful prompt for the intuition and instinct of other people embarking on bold journeys. But then I realized, I don't want to read a whole book about that. What I want is a few tactile examples. If there's some psychology research or something that helps explain it, I want to understand that as well. And then I want something that really pushes me, that prompts me to think differently, that gives me a different lens for the moment. But I don't want to read too much. I want it to just be there and be done, because frankly, a lot of my readers are very busy, and they have information overload in their lives right now. And maybe the traditional end-to-end business book that reiterates the same point 7 times is really not as attuned to this generation of leaders. So that was at least my approach. And again, I did this for me first and foremost, but I hope that the readers, find those piercing insights at the right time, and that I've written just enough for it to resonate with them.
As I was kind of going through it, the other thing I was thinking is some of these would make great little almost like short animated videos. They're almost that kind of length where they would work for things like Instagram videos, but they're just, for many of those people that wouldn't necessarily even pick up a book like this. The lessons that you say in this book is not necessarily even just building a big company, but what it obviously requires to build a creative life as well. And one of the ideas you speak about in this book, I just thought was great, and I think probably every never mind entrepreneurs and creators, but maybe politicians should read, which is make one subtraction for every addition, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so that's a little piece from the product section in the middle, and actually, you'll know that I actually shaded the whole section, gave it a different font to call out the fact that in some ways it's like a book within a book about product optimization. And I fully disclaim in the beginning, either, some people that know me from the product world might skip to this section while others might skip it altogether, because it's really for those who are crafting products and experiences for customers. But the big theme of that section is maintaining simplicity. I talk about the product life cycle, how people flock to a simple product because it's so refreshing, it's easy to understand, it makes their lives easier. And then that new product takes those users for granted, starts adding complications and new features to appease power users to the point where suddenly it's complicated again, and then users flock to a simple product. And that process repeats itself, and I call it the product life cycle. And so I talk in that section about some ways of escaping the inevitability of building a complicated product. How do you just keep something simple
that we see?
Yeah, because I do believe it's inevitable. Every product ultimately wants to appease power users, wants to build a business model, adds more features, becomes more complicated. And one of those practices that I've seen some teams employ is sort of this in-out kind of model where you're bringing a new feature in and you ask yourself the question, is this new feature way more exciting and promising than a feature that's already live? And if that other feature that's live is in any ways adding complication, isn't as valuable to me and to the user's experience, should I actually consider killing it or making it a little more hidden? Because what you find in a digital product especially is that when you take out a few things, people use the things that are still in there more. Yeah. And it's like, oh, wow. So the more I take out, the more people will actually use the things that matter most. And we learned this the hard way with Behance. We had a groups feature, we had a tip exchange, and all these other things that we had that we actually ultimately removed. Because every time we removed one of those things, people made more projects in their portfolio. They just got less distracted and more focused. And it was like, well, if that's the core object of our product, if that's what Behance is all about, people building their portfolio, let's not get in the way.
Yeah. As I was reading that chapter, make one subtraction for every edition, I actually thought there was when I used to live in the Bay Area, there was a product I used. It was actually Kevin Rose. Before he joined Google Ventures, he had like a company there. Like it was a very small like product, a little kind of, I don't know what you would call it. They made apps. They were making interesting little apps, and there was one, I think it was called Oink. A very, very simple little app, which was, instead of reviewing the place like a Yelp would do, different restaurants, it reviewed the things in the place. And I remember, so you could actually say, okay, I want the best mac and cheese in San Francisco just now. Where's the best mac and cheese? And it would review the thing. I absolutely love that. And it just did one thing really, really well, and it was acquired by Google, and then it completely obviously disappeared. And you also live in this world of being obviously very creative ventures, and then also working in the world of VC and that side as well. I do wonder, do you feel that there's a risk with we're starting to see a real preponderance of a small number of very, very players who are acquiring or acqui-hiring companies, that some of those really good ideas that were the start are just being simply kind of crushed in the general bigness of things, and they're not really getting a chance to flourish? Is that a danger when it comes to new ideas, new creative ideas kind of coming out into the market and really being given that time to have that messy middle?
Well, it's a good question around the environment of funding, of acquisitions, of just the frenzied environment of tech altogether in this instance. Does that get in the way of middles, right? And I think a lot about Behance. We in our messy middle, really messy middle, the middle of our middle, which was the first 5 years of our company bootstrapping the business through 2008, which was one of the harder years to survive during that big market pullback, and everyone was sort of the funding environment froze up for a little bit, and in some ways, in some areas, so going through that period really made us a stronger team, really helped us zero in on not only the product, but also just the culture and build like a real great team that wanted to be there for the right reasons. And that's what you risk in a world that's all focused on funding and acquisitions and everything else is people start to hop around. There's less loyalty to a team, and it's funny. Like one of the sections of the book, I talk about how maybe one of the greatest competitive advantages of a new company is a team willing to stick together long enough to figure it out.
Yeah, it's the I'm trying to remember the band did Rumors. What was the great band did the album Rumors? I've now suddenly forgotten.
Oh,
but they made the album, the big album Rumors, was actually made not far from the Bay Area, just over in Marin County in Mill Valley. And they went through a number of different types of albums, which didn't really kind of hit until they kind of found their flow, found their thing. But if something had happened, those members of those band had been brought into other things, they wouldn't have had a chance to really fully explore that creative side and create something entirely new. I'm wondering, as you kind of went through that journey, and you talk about in the book, and it's obviously not just about your journey, but journeys of other people that you've worked with and you've helped and advised. What was the kind of the darkest moment in that time? The time when you perhaps thought, I don't know if we can get through this. I think maybe this is maybe now's the time to go and do something else.
Oh, there were many, and I talk about a number of them in the messy middle. I think one of the hard parts for me were periods of just complete anonymity. No one really cared about what we were doing, and I think, it's just hard to not exist in the world, even if your entire passion and heart is into something. I talk about in the book how whenever you typed in Behance on Google, it always said, "Do you mean enhance? Do you mean enhance?" And I mean, we were literally a mistake. And the idea for the team was that maybe someday Google will no longer think we were a mistake. Maybe we'll actually be a legitimate search result. And it was little goals like that were actually the short-term rewards that I talk about in the book that like helped us stay motivated towards an end. And of course, one day an engineer comes in like 2008 at some point and early 2008 and types in Behance and it comes up. And then I kid you not, like Beyonce was suddenly becoming super popular and we lost our search again. But it was, so I think it was periods of anonymity that I found particularly hard. Also, there were difficult times where I had to let someone go. And in an early team like this, where it's sort of more of a family than a sports team and everyone wants to kind of stick together, and the idea of having to let someone go because they're just not a good match for the team, or they're not, they're just not pulling their weight. I always would tell myself that we were, as an early stage team, everyone had to be an A player. We just all had to be able to rely on each other and not believe any one of us would drop the ball. But I found it very hard to make decisions like that. And I talk about in the book kind of the things I would try to tell myself to just make myself suck it up and do my work and do my job, because otherwise it's super easy to just find reasons to delay decisions that need to be made.
There's a quick fire questions as we start to finish up here. If you were to recommend any kind of resources, any tools or apps, especially for someone like yourself that's maybe listening just now, they've got a really busy life with busy business, they've got things kind of going on, but they also want to make time to be able, in your case, to write, to kind of get their ideas out there into the world in that way, and especially in form of a book. What tools, what apps would you suggest to them?
For getting their ideas out there?
Yeah, for either collecting. Actually, I mean, I know you're a kind of power user of Evernote. I've heard you speak with Tim Ferriss before about this, and so it's those kind of tools, like in terms of collating all this information as you're getting these ideas, and then putting them into some form so that you can kind of then get that out into the world.
Yeah, well, I am a relentless capturer, because I find that things that stick in my mind end up consuming my energy unless I get them out there, or get them down rather. So I do use Wunderlist for tasks. I use Evernote for organizing, kind of in slow baking long-term projects. That I'll start a note and then I'll come back to it a year later and continue thinking about it and sharing some other stuff I came across that relates to it, that sort of thing. I love Twitter as a way to share ideas and get feedback quickly, sometimes brutally. I and then there are other. I've started to also kind of communicate myself more visually, somewhat self-serving because it is one of my teams. So that's my disclaimer. But there's a product called Adobe Spark, which is kind of like a social marketing communications tool that you can kind of take any template and then just throw your words in there and make a beautiful kind of image representing the thought. And I've started to use that more often to just to demonstrate things visually, whether it's an internal message to my team or something that I'll post on social media. And I think you're going to see more people shy away from big, bulky, hard to use design tools and more towards like quick kind of agile ways of demonstrating yourself or communicating yourself visually. And then, what else? I mean, I'm a big Google Apps user. That nothing special, but I would say that's my arsenal.
Great. And then if you were to recommend just one book, not one of your own books, about what it takes to live a creative life, that could either be on the craft or the mindset or just kind of doing the work, what would that book be?
Herding Tigers by Todd Henry, which is a book about managing in the creative world and managing creatives. And obviously, that notion of herding tigers, it's an interesting idea of like, how do you make sure that a creative team is productive? I've always been obsessed with productive creativity. Obviously, there's a book called Flow by, oh my goodness, Csikszentmihalyi, right?
Yeah.
who talks about just like the state of creativity and the creative flow. And I think that's also kind of a legendary text in our world.
Now, we were speaking about music there a second ago. If there's one album that you would recommend, one record to people, what would that record be?
An album. It would probably be a Radiohead album, one of them.
OK Computer, perhaps.
There you go.
There you go. Fantastic. We'll put that link there as well. And I want you to finally imagine, this is maybe going to be a strange thing for you, but I know you've built a lot of success with these businesses. You're now, obviously with the VC side as well. But I kind of want to take yourself back, put yourself in the world today, but you have no contacts, no one knows you, no one. You have to restart. Thankfully, you've got all the skills or the knowledge you've acquired. What would you do? How would you restart today?
I think, I probably would restart by finding one or two people that are like perfect partners. I think that was the most important thing I did with Behance is I found Matthias, who is a co-founder and an incredible designer and just kind of was a yin to my yang. I found Dave and Chris, two early engineers, and Brian, third, who were just really all along for the ride, believed in the mission, and again, like really complemented the things that I was strong with. They had opposite strengths and skills. And when you just get a little bit of a dream team together that has a complementary skill set and some shared values, you can go in any direction, and I believe that you can end in a good place. And so I think that's the first thing that I would do. I would also write. I find that writing ideas down and thoughts down and principles and all of that kind of stuff, it's just a way of ingraining it into who you are, getting feedback, and also having what you write and compose and share with the world become a great communication device for who you are.
Fantastic. And if people want to learn more about the messy middle and the ideas in the book, where's the best place for them to go and do that?
I invite anyone who's listening to follow along at Scott Belsky on Twitter or Instagram. It's certainly where I share things that I find in the world that are interesting and the latest work that I'm up to. Of course, I hope that your listeners pick up The Messy Middle. This is a labor of love, about a 5 to 7 year project. And I'm just excited to get it out into the world. I want to hear what people think about it and how they disagree and everything else in between. And I just want to thank you for helping me spread the word and having me on the show.
Well, it's fantastic. It's a great book, and it's definitely, I'm using, as I mentioned earlier, I'm using it as a grazing book. So I basically read a chapter like a day or every second day, and I kind of reflect on it. That's how I'm kind of getting, because I feel it's so packed with things. You need time to kind of think about and reflect on that. I think it's too much to have at one go. It's too much in one
I like
bite.
that. A grazing book.
It's a grazing book. So So, Scott, thank you so much today for coming on and sharing with us all about your creative life. And I wish you all the best with the book and everything that you're up to.
Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
If you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.